Today's story is one that runs so deep it might leave your heart standing still. A tale shaped by winter winds, quiet danger, and the raw tenderness only the Wild West could carve into two lost souls. Out here, where the horizon stretches farther than a man's memory, and every shadow might hide a threat, fate has a way of pulling strangers together when they least expect it. It all began with a single moment, one small choice that changed everything. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. New Mexico Territory, December 1882. Night settled in heavy and unforgiving. The wind had been howling since sundown, rolling down from the northern ridges with a bite sharp enough to scrape through wool and settle deep into bone. Dry snow slid sideways across the high ground like drifting ash. The sky, black, weighty, unmoving, pressed low over the land. The chill buried in Rafe Calloway's chest felt no different from the cold clawing at the cabin walls. The fire still lived, but barely. He fed the stove another stack of seasoned pine cut from behind the shed. The iron belly glowed a dull, angry red, while his hands, scarred, stiff, deliberate, worked with slow purpose. No wasted movement, no hurry. He followed the same routine every winter night. Heat the fire, cook a little, clean the pan, put an edge on the knife, check the latch, load the Winchester, sit, endure, nothing more. His cabin was as bare as a jail cell. One room, thick log walls sealed with packed mud, a thin window, a narrow cot he never bothered to make, a chair by the fire, another by the door, a rough table, a basin, a stove, one extra blanket. No photographs, no keepsakes, nothing tied to memory. He was 38, worn down by miles of trail dust, broken commands, and too many goodbyes. Once an Army scout. 2 years spent riding territory lines that turned into mass graves and quiet blame. They discharged him after a mission in Utah went wrong. He returned alone, and nobody asked how. He didn't request release. Orders just stopped coming. Letters stopped being answered. That was 5 years back. He settled here because no one else wanted this stretch of frozen land, hot as a skillet in the summer, deadly in winter, too far from town, too close to forgotten Apache trails. It suited him fine. He didn't want neighbors, didn't want church bells, saloon drunks, or anyone's pity. He bought a mule, put up a fence line, and outlasted the seasons. That was enough. Until tonight. At first he thought the noise outside was just the wind shifting, but then came something else. Not a knock, not a boot fall, something weak, struggling, then a heavy, muffled thud. Rafe was on his feet before he had time to think. Years of instinct snapped taut. His hand went to the rifle, though he didn't bring it up. He eased to the door, pressed one shoulder against it, and listened. Nothing. Then again, scratching. Not on wood, on the frozen step. He slid the bolt free. What he saw stopped him cold. A woman, kneeling. Or more accurately, collapsed, barely upright, barefoot, skin blotched purple and raw from frost. Her deerskin dress, Apache made, hung in torn strips soaked through with melted snow. Bits of beadwork clung to ripped tassels. Her long black hair stuck in wet ropes across her cheek and shoulders. Her arms trembled under her own weight. When her eyes finally met his, they didn't beg. Not yet. They only searched his face, trying to figure out if he would strike her or let her speak. Then her cracked lips parted. "I can serve," she whispered, voice roughened near to breaking. "If you want, just nod out here." It wasn't teasing, not desperation of desire. Just survival. Something struck Rafe hard in the chest. Not pity, not want, recognition. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't scheming. She was simply trying not to die. He didn't answer. He just stepped aside and opened the door wider. She blinked, stunned. Then her strength failed. Her body pitched forward onto the wooden floor. No cry, only the thud of a soaked rag hitting the planks. She curled in on herself out of instinct. Rafe shoved the door shut fast. The temperature inside dropped instantly. He dropped to a knee beside her. She recoiled when he reached for her shoulder. "Easy," he murmured, his own voice sounding foreign to him. He hadn't used it much lately. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't answer him, didn't lift her gaze. She only curled in tighter, trying to hold on to whatever warmth she could find. Rafe eased his arms beneath her and lifted her toward the fire. She weighed almost nothing, stiff as frozen canvas. Her feet felt like blocks of stone. Frostbite burned along her skin, and when his fingertips brushed the torn edge of her waist, he felt welts, bruises, and old pain hidden beneath dirt and scattered beadwork. He said nothing. He set her down on a folded horse blanket beside the stove, far enough to keep her safe from the flames, close enough to catch the heat. She stirred faintly. Her eyes drifted toward the glow. "Please," she whispered again. "You can take me. I won't fight." Rafe shook his head once, firm and final. "No." She frowned, confused, almost disbelieving. Her mouth parted as if to ask again, but he cut her off quietly. "You don't owe me a damn thing." She stared at him, frozen in more ways than one. Not just the cold, but the shock of someone offering her safety without asking a price. The idea seemed impossible to her. He stepped away, crossed to the old chest at the back wall, and pulled out a spare blanket, a pair of dry socks, and a boiled shirt, far too big, but better than the soaked hide clinging to her. He returned, set the items beside her without touching her again, and knelt at the stove, feeding the flames until heat rolled across the room. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upright. Her arms trembled with the effort. Her legs wouldn't hold, but she managed to sit. Rafe studied her face, eyes dry and reddened, jaw locked tight. No tears, just the stubborn grit of someone who'd endured far too much. She reached for the shirt first, pulling it over her torn dress with clumsy fingers. He turned away, giving her space. A minute later, he heard her whisper, "Why?" He didn't bother answering. Instead, he dipped coffee from the pot, poured it into a tin cup, and placed it on the floor beside her. Then he sat on the far side of the fire, silent. She stared at the cup before finally lifting it and taking a small drink. "Thank you," she murmured, softer this time. He nodded once. Still didn't speak. Outside, the storm dragged its claws across the walls, but the cabin held steady. The fire held steady. And for the first time in 5 long winters, Rafe Calloway wasn't alone. The storm punished the cabin all night, hammering the roof, shoving wind through every crack and seam. But the fire stayed alive. He'd built it with the driest wood he owned. He sat beside it long after she'd gone still. He didn't sleep, just sat in the corner chair, arms crossed, coat still on, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. She never cried, never whimpered. But every now and then her body jerked, small flinches as if she expected something to strike her. Close to midnight, she jolted awake with a gasp, clutching her legs. When she realized she was covered, warm, untouched, she lay back down without a word. So did he. She slept near the fire. He never offered the cot. That would have felt too intimate, too soon. Besides, no one had touched that cot in years. Around 2 a.m, he rose, refilled the tin cup with coffee, and stood by the frost-rimmed window, listening to snow scrape along the cabin's far wall. Ironfoot was sheltered in the shed. So was Bristle. He'd checked them before night set. Both were quiet now. Everything was quiet except the storm and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She shifted beneath the blanket again. Her feet were still torn raw. Cracks, scabs, frozen dirt embedded deep. Her fingers, too, darkening at the tips. If she hadn't reached his door, if she had collapsed even 10 feet farther, she would already be part of the snowdrifts. Rafe turned back to the fire, settled again into the chair, trying to quiet the thoughts he didn't want to face. He never questioned why he let her in. The truth was too simple, too heavy. He just couldn't leave another soul to freeze to death. Not again. Gray morning seeped in slow and pale, drifting through the narrow window like falling ash. The wind had eased, but the cold still gripped the world tight. Everything outside lay still, white, frozen, silent. Inside, she stirred. Her eyes blinked open. She looked at the fire, then at him, and suddenly sat up too fast. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. She winced, pulling it back across her chest where her torn dress had fallen open at the neckline. Her hair hung in a tangled sweep over one shoulder. She clutched the blanket tighter and eased back a step, her breath quick and shaky. Rafe stayed still. "You're safe," he said quietly. She stared at him, lips cracked and dry. Even with her fingers wrapped in cloth, the tremor wouldn't leave them. "You didn't—" He shook his head once. "I didn't." She held his gaze a moment longer. Then something in her shoulders loosened. Not trust, but pure exhaustion. Pulling the blanket closer, she leaned against the wall. Rafe moved to the stove, lifted the tin pot, and scraped what beans remained into a small bowl. He warmed it over the coals without looking her way. "I got food," he said softly. "Ain't much, but it's hot." She didn't respond. When the bowl was ready, he set it on the floor near her and stepped back to sit across from her again. She waited a long while, then reached out slowly. Her hands were stiff, awkward around the spoon. She ate in tiny, careful bites, looking up between each one. Rafe caught it. She was studying him, the way a trapped creature watches for a hint of danger. "You Apache?" he asked at last. She nodded once. "Name?" Silence. He didn't push. He let the quiet settle. When she finished, she set the bowl down gently. After a moment, she whispered, "Suna." Rafe nodded. He still didn't offer his own name. Not yet. He folded his arms and leaned back in the chair. "Where are you coming from?" Her eyes lowered to the fire. She let the flames talk for a while before she did. "North. 2 days walking. Maybe 3. No shoes. Lost track. Alone." Another nod. Slower this time. He didn't ask anything else. Questions could wait. He leaned forward, took the bowl back, rinsed it in the basin. She watched him. Watched the quiet way he moved, the way he didn't demand anything in return. It unsettled her more than cruelty would have. When he turned around, she was trying to stand. Rafe stepped forward fast, but she held up a hand. Bracing herself against the wall, she pushed upright. Her knees buckled, and she caught the edge of the table with both hands. "I need to go." "You walk out now, you freeze," he said. She looked at the door, then at him. "You didn't touch me, didn't take anything. You don't want me here." "I never said that." She looked unconvinced. He motioned towards the fire. "You stay till you can stand without falling on your face." "I can go," she insisted. "You can barely stand." Her eyes sparked, not with fear, but pride. The flash of it hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't trying to escape him. She just didn't want to be a burden. "I got room," he said softer now. "Plenty of wood, water, beans. You don't owe me a thing." She hesitated, fingers digging into the table edge. Then finally she eased back down near the stove. She didn't thank him. But she didn't walk out into the snow either. That was enough. Rafe returned to his chair and stared into the fire. They sat in silence. Two strangers sharing the same heat, wondering if the world would ever give either of them peace. The second day hit colder. Snow hadn't stopped, not truly. A fresh drift sealed the cabin door shut by dawn. Rafe had to shoulder it open just to see outside. The drift came up to his thigh, smooth, untouched. He didn't wander far, just to check on Bristle in the shed, knock snow off the roof, and haul another armload of wood. 20 minutes out there left his hands raw even through gloves. Inside, the heat had faded. The fire had sunk to orange coals, letting cold creep in from every corner. Suna was awake, still wrapped in the shirt he'd given her, sitting close to the stove. Her eyes followed him when he entered. She didn't speak, but something in her posture had shifted. Still guarded, but not ready to bolt like before. Rafe stomped snow off his boots, dropped the wood beside the stove, and fed 3 fresh logs into the fire. Flames rose, spreading warmth like something earned. Suna held her hands toward the heat. He noticed the swelling in her fingers, the cracks along the skin, the darkened tips. The cloth she'd wrapped them with had already soaked through with blood. Rafe grabbed clean cloth strips from the crate beside the cot, old undershirts he'd boiled and dried, and knelt beside her, offering them in his open palm. She stiffened, uncertain. "I won't lay a hand on you unless you say so," he told her. After a quiet moment, she lifted her hands toward him, slow and shaking. He settled onto the floor across from her and began unwrapping the crude bindings she'd made. Her fingers were in worse shape than he'd guessed. Deep, split cracks, bruising under the nails turning dark. He worked gently, saying nothing, letting the firelight do the talking while he cleaned the wounds with warm water, dried them carefully, and wrapped each finger in fresh cloth. She didn't pull back, didn't flinch. When he finished, she lowered her hands into her lap and stared at them for a long time. "Thank you," she murmured. Rafe gave a single nod and rose. Her gaze traveled around the cabin like she was truly seeing it for the first time. The cot tucked in the corner, the pans hung from nails, the stack of tin plates, the rifle resting on the log wall. Her eyes lingered on the chair holding his coat. "You live out here by yourself?" she asked. "5 winters now." "No woman?" He shook his head. "No." She didn't ask why, but her eyes stayed on him a second longer, as if piecing together what kind of man chose solitude over the world. Later that morning, Rafe cooked cornmeal mush in the same tin pot, thickening it with dried beans. It wasn't much, but steam rolled through the room and pushed out the smell of smoke, giving the cabin a thin edge of warmth. He served her first. She tried to take the bowl, but her fingers slipped. He caught it before it spilled and set it gently on the floor in front of her. She muttered something under her breath in Apache. He didn't pry. A moment later, she spoke again. Quieter this time. "You give before you take." He didn't answer. "And you don't eat until I eat," she added. "Habit," he said simply. She watched him, really watched him. He felt her eyes on him, but didn't look back. He just ladled some for himself and sat by the fire. They ate without talking. The silence wasn't heavy. more like two people being careful not to disturb whatever fragile peace had settled in. By midday, she stood without wobbling, took 3 full steps. Rafe didn't rise to help her, didn't crowd her, just watched. She stopped at the window and rested her hand on the sill. "All white," she whispered. "Storm ain't breaking today," he said. "You're stuck here same as me." "Yep." She glanced his way. "Why do you live so far out?" He didn't answer right off. He rarely did. But she waited. "No one left to bury out here," he finally said. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. Something in her quiet told him she already understood loss in ways most people never would. She took 2 more steps, leaning against the wall for balance. "You're not like other white men," she said, not looking at him. He didn't know what to do with that. He didn't want praise, didn't earn it. He just knew he wasn't going to be another shadow from her past. She faced him then, arms crossed over her chest, trying to hide the skin still showing through the torn dress. "I don't have another," she whispered. "Another what?" "Dress, shoes, nothing. They took everything." Rafe nodded once, not pity, just recognition. "I got a spare blanket," he said. "You can tie it around yourself till we find something better." She hesitated. "Will you show me how to tie it?" He stood, walked to the cot, grabbed the wool blanket and brought it to her, holding it open. She turned around slowly, arms still crossed tight. He draped it around her shoulders, waiting until she reached back for the loose ends. His fingers brushed her back as he helped knot it behind her neck. He stepped away fast. She turned to face him again, wrapped fully now. Her eyes didn't drop. They held his, steady this time, no fear, just tired truth, and something clearer than before. That night he didn't touch the cot. He unrolled his bedroll on the opposite side of the room near the rifle and kept his coat on for warmth. Suna curled near the stove, blanket pulled high, her back toward him. The cabin fell still. They exchanged no words after dark, but she hadn't offered herself again, and he hadn't needed to refuse. She understood now. She was allowed to stay without fear. That was the first night they rested in the same space, no longer strangers, but 2 people relearning how to live with silence without fearing it. The stove died sometime before daylight. Rafe could tell not by looking, but by the way the early light eased through the small window. Brighter, softer, no flakes drifting past it. The wind had finally settled too, leaving a quiet outside that matched the quiet between the walls. He rose carefully. The fire had dwindled to faint embers, and his breath fogged as he moved. Suna still slept curled near the stove, wrapped tight in the blanket. Her features were relaxed, not peaceful exactly, but no longer braced the way they had been before. In sleep she looked younger, less guarded. He didn't wake her. Instead he stepped outside. The cold was sharp, but different now. Clean, unmoving. The whole ridge lay buried beneath smooth white drifts, broken only by the slope of the roof and the dark outline of the shed half swallowed by snow. His boots cracked the crust as he made his way to the animals. Bristle snorted when he opened the shed door. Ironfoot, slower to stir, lifted his head with a lazy blink. Rafe mucked the stall, cracked ice in the trough, and dropped hay in the rack. The motions were second nature, but his thoughts weren't on feed or weather. They stayed inside, with the woman sleeping by the stove. When he stepped back into the cabin, she was up, sitting cross-legged, back to the fire. She had folded the blanket tight around her shoulders, the boiled shirt beneath it, and tied her hair back roughly with a strip of leather. Her eyes shifted toward the door as he entered, but she wasn't startled this time. Your horse sounds old, she said evenly. Rafe brushed snow from his coat before shutting the door. Older than Bristle, he answered. But steadier. She nodded. Mules make noise. With snow that deep, yours probably cursed you the whole way. It was the closest he'd come to a joke in years. It landed quiet, but her lip twitched, half a smile or something close. He took off his gloves, set them on the stove, and started preparing breakfast. Cornmeal mush again, this time with a pinch of salt. He didn't ask if she was hungry. He didn't have to. When it was ready, she moved to the table without a word. He set the bowl down, and she gave a small nod before eating. Her movements were less stiff now, more certain. After a few bites, she glanced around the cabin. You always live like this, alone, quiet, no mess. He shrugged. No one to make a mess for. She considered that. Not lonely? He paused, thinking. No. She didn't believe him. He could see that clear as day. After they finished eating, she stood and walked the room's perimeter, testing her legs. At the window, she wiped away frost and looked out over the ridge. How far to town? Half a day on Ironfoot, longer on foot. You go once a month for supplies? He nodded. She turned toward him. I want to help. He looked up from the pot he was cleaning. Help what? Work. Do something. You're still healing. I have hands. He studied her. She wasn't offering from desperation now. She was claiming a place, a right to contribute. He didn't argue. There's a basin behind the shed, he said. If we break the ice, we can boil water. Wash what's worth saving. She stepped toward the door, barefoot. Wait, he said. He went to the cot, dug through a crate, and pulled out an old pair of socks and the only spare boots he owned. Cracked leather, scuffed, far too big. These won't fit. They'll do, she said. He helped her lace them. She didn't flinch when his hands brushed her ankles. Her legs were scraped raw, red from frost, but healing. Outside, the sky had cleared, a pale blue stretching wide over distant pines and frozen brush barely peeking through the snow. Bitter air, but bearable. She moved slowly through the drifts. Rafe stayed near, not hovering, but close enough if she faltered. At the basin, he broke the ice with a rusted axe head and dipped the buckets. She carried one back to the cabin without needing to be told, set it on the stove to boil. Then she picked up her torn dress and began cleaning it. He didn't interrupt, just watched. Her focus tightened with every movement, every thread she pulled loose, every bead she laid aside. None of it was random. She wasn't mending a dress. She was reclaiming something that had been taken. He understood. Later, standing at the table with steam rising from the cloth in her hands, she asked quietly, "Do you have a needle?" He picked up the small tin he kept with the rifle oil and handed it to her. She threaded a strip of dark sinew and began stitching. Rafe watched from the chair, arms folded. And for the first time, the room didn't feel quite so empty. "You do that well," Rafe said. "My mother made sure I learned," Suna replied. "She told me if I ever had nothing else left, at least I'd know how to repair what was mine." He nodded. "Smart lesson." She looked up briefly. "Most men I've known didn't think so." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. By nightfall, the mended dress hung drying from a line stretched across the room. The cabin carried the smell of warm hide, boiled water, and old wood smoke. She handed the borrowed boots back to him. "You got me through today," she said softly. "They're yours," he replied. "I've got another pair." She hesitated. Then, "Thank you." He dipped his head. That night they sat at the table again. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, no talk, but something easier than silence. Not comfort, exactly. Permission. Before bedding down, she folded her blanket herself, not waiting for him, laid it by the fire, then turned to him. "Good night," she said. It was the first time she chose the last word. He stood by his bedroll, paused a moment. "Good night, Suna." And for the first time in years, saying a name aloud didn't scrape something raw inside Rafe Calloway. By the 4th morning, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Rafe rose early, stoked the stove, tended to Bristle and Ironfoot. Suna stayed inside until the air warmed, then boiled water and set their bowls out without being asked. She didn't ask permission to help anymore. She moved through the space as if she belonged. Because she did. When he stepped back inside, she was pouring water into the basin. Sleeves rolled high, hands still wrapped but steadier. Her hair was brushed back and tied into a loose braid, damp from washing. "Snow's letting up," Rafe said, stripping off his gloves. "Might be clear enough to ride to town in a couple days." She gave a small nod. "You'll go then? For coffee? Powder? Flour?" "Yeah. Need to restock." "You're going alone?" "I always do." She didn't look away when she asked, "Do you want me gone by then?" The question hit clean and heavy, like a fence post splitting in frost, direct, inescapable. He hung his coat before answering. She turned back to the basin, dipping a cloth and wringing it tight. Her arms were tense. She didn't repeat the question, but it lingered in the air like damp wood smoke. Finally, he said, "You can stay as long as you want." She froze, hands still in the water, back toward him. "Even after I'm strong again?" He nodded. "Yes." A long silence followed. Then she whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before." He didn't know how to reply, so he didn't. Later that afternoon, the clouds finally broke. Blue sky opened wide across the ridge, sunlight cutting across the snow like sheets of glass. They stepped out together for the first time. She wrapped in the patched blanket, he carrying a kettle to melt snow. He stole a glance at her as she stared across the horizon. "What do you see out there?" he asked. She didn't answer for several heartbeats. Then quietly, "Something that's not trying to hurt me." He didn't push. When they stepped back inside, she paused just past the doorway, running her fingers along the wood where the frame met the log wall. Then she turned toward him. "You ever have a wife?" He didn't flinch, but the weight behind his answer didn't hide itself. "Yeah." She waited. "She died before the war ended. Fever. We didn't have medicine. Or time." Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes softened. "You still love her?" "I think about her," he said, "but I don't expect her to walk back through that door. That ain't the same as loving a ghost." Suna took a careful step closer. Not nervous, just deliberate. "Did you bury her up here?" "No, in Texas, before I came west." He expected her to stop there. Instead, she asked, "You came here to forget?" He looked at her. "No, I came here so I wouldn't have to keep explaining." Suna seemed to understand. She said nothing more for a long time. But when they sat for supper that evening, something had shifted. She sat a little closer. She didn't wait for him to lift his spoon first. And when he poured coffee afterward, her hand reached across the table. Not for the cup. Her wrapped fingers rested gently on his hand. He froze. She didn't retreat. He didn't pull away. Her voice was barely more than breath. "You don't touch unless I say so." "No," he answered. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "This time, I say so." He didn't grab her hand, didn't lean in. He simply turned his palm upward beneath hers, letting their hands settle together on the table. Their first touch, born not from injury or fear or bargaining, but choice. When she finally rose to lie near the fire, she didn't say goodnight. She didn't have to. He watched her walk toward the stove, lay out the bedroll, and settle in. She didn't look back, but he didn't need her to. He knew. Without question, she felt safe now, and for the first time in years, so did he. The wind had died off entirely. For nearly a week, the land had done nothing but howl. Now it sat still. No flurries drifting past the window, no whistle pushing through the seams. Just quiet. The kind that fills a room when silence isn't a threat. The fire burned steady, low even, unhurried. It cast a warm orange wash across the log walls, shadows moving slow like they had nowhere else to go. Rafe sat in his usual chair, one boot resting on the opposite knee, eyes half-lidded as he watched the flames dance. Suna sat closer to the stove, legs folded beneath her, wrapped in the freshly mended deerskin dress and the gray blanket knotted across her shoulders. She had finished brushing her hair, long, even strokes, and set the comb on the table without asking him. She didn't need to. 4 days of living side by side had carved out a rhythm, something neither named but both respected. There were corners of the cabin that were hers now, by the stove, at the table, by the doorway where she sometimes stood to breathe the cold air. Rafe didn't intrude. He didn't ask what she had endured. He didn't need the story. Sometimes a person's history was written in how they stepped through a doorway, or how they flinched at moving shadows, or how they refused to sleep with their back to anything. Suna didn't flinch anymore. And tonight, for the first time, she turned not toward her bedroll, but toward him. She rose slowly. No theatrics, no trembling, just a quiet decision made and carried out. He watched her cross the room one step at a time, each movement deliberate. She stopped in front of him, close enough he could see the red on her knuckles, the faint pink of old burns along her wrist. She didn't speak. She simply lowered onto her knees in front of him, hands resting lightly on her thighs. Rafe leaned forward a little, elbows on his knees, his breath steady, though his chest tightened. Not from fear, not guilt, but from the weight of something real settling between them. "You don't owe me anything," he murmured. "I know," she said. "You don't have to do this." "I'm not doing anything," she replied, voice calm. "I'm just sitting here." He gave a small nod. She shifted, lifted his hand gently, and held it between both of hers. Her thumbs brushed the rough ridges in his palm, tracing the scars rope and steel had carved there. She didn't shy from the hardness of his skin. "You were in a war," she said softly. He nodded. She reached up and brushed the scar on his jaw, barely a touch, then let her hand fall. "So was I," she whispered. Rafe looked at her fully now, their eyes locked. And for the first time since she walked through his door, the silence between them wasn't about fear, uncertainty, or waiting on words. It was recognition, understanding, choosing to stay present without filling the space with anything that might break it. Suna lowered her head gently against his knee. He didn't move. His hand hovered over her hair for a long moment before he let it settle. No pressure, no demand, just being there. She closed her eyes. The fire cracked softly. Outside, snow reflected pale moonlight across the ridge. Inside, they sat unmoving. A woman who had survived fire and a man who had buried more ghosts than anyone should. not touching out of desperation. Not out of fear. Just breathing the same warm air beside the same fire. Dawn came without warning. No color streaking the sky. Just a growing brightness across the snow outside, as if someone had turned the world up a notch. The sky stayed low and flat, pressing on the land. Inside, the fire had burned to coals. Rafe was already dressed, boots on, coat half-buttoned, rifle in hand. He hadn't spoken yet, hadn't even looked her way. But the tension in his shoulders told Suna something was wrong. She pushed up from the bedroll, clutching the blanket around her. "What is it?" He didn't answer at first, just stood at the door, one hand on the bolt. Then he said only 2 words. "Footprints." She stood quickly, forgetting the cold. "How many?" "2," he replied, voice steady but clipped. "Could be riders who came up and backed out. Could be they circled." "You don't know?" He shook his head once, not yet. She stepped up beside him, bare feet on the cold boards, but didn't flinch at the sting. She looked through the narrow crack in the wall near the stove, catching a glimpse of the white slope rolling down toward the ridge. Nothing stirred. "Do they know you live out here?" she asked. "Maybe. Maybe not." He finally turned, meeting her eyes with unshaken calm. "You ever handle a rifle?" She gave one slow nod. "Better with a bow, but I can shoot." He handed her his sidearm from the shelf, heavy, worn smooth, the leather grips dark from years of use. He didn't offer instructions, just placed it in her palms, and she accepted it like she'd done it before. He pointed to the crate by the table. "Shells inside, if it comes to that. Stay low. What about you?" "I'm heading out 20 paces. Need to see where they came from." She hesitated. "You sure?" "No," he answered simply. "But I need to know." He slipped out the door, easing it shut behind him. Suna moved fast. She loaded the pistol, slower than she might string a bow, but steady. She checked the chamber twice, then crouched low by the stove, eyes locked on the door, heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every moan in the timbers, every brush of wind carried sharp edges now. Time crawled. She counted her breaths. Footsteps returned, heavy, familiar. She raised the pistol, aimed, held. The door opened. Rafe stepped inside. She lowered the gun before he spoke. "Boot tracks heading south," he said. "No horses, just feet. Deep ones." "Men?" she asked. "Likely. Armed, too." "Looking for me?" "Could be. Could be anyone out here." He set his rifle aside. "But the trail's fresh. They came close." She didn't ask what he intended. She didn't need to. "I'll start packing what we've got," she said. He didn't argue, just crossed the room, grabbed the spare blanket from beside the cot, and handed it to her. "We leave by midday. Take the ridge path north. Plenty of cover." She nodded. He paused, a brief hitch, hardly there, then laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "You holding up?" She faced him fully, eyes unwavering. "I'm tired of running, but if you need me close, I'll stay with you." The words rested longer in him than he wanted to show. By noon, the sun broke through the cloud cover, warming the surface snow just enough to soften it. Their steps left a clear trail as they moved away from the cabin toward the high pass, where scrub brush and rocks broke the wind's line of sight. They didn't speak much, but when they walked side by side, neither looked back, and that meant more than anything else. The ridge wasn't a true trail, just an old game run threading through rock clusters and thin pines. Snow clung to the shaded stretches, but the sun had warmed the crest enough to make the climb manageable. Their boots cracked through patches of ice and powder, the only rhythm their footfalls and breath. Rafe took the lead, rifle ready, eyes cutting across the landscape. Suna followed close, the pistol tucked into the folds of her blanket. Her hands were steady. She never complained, never slowed, even when the incline burned her legs. The cold barely registered anymore. What pressed on them instead was the sense of being watched. Rounding a switchback, Suna halted abruptly. "There," she whispered, pointing downslope. Rafe scanned the ridge below with practiced focus. Boot tracks, deep, wide, less than 2 hours old. "They circled," she murmured. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Didn't follow. Just wanted to see if someone was living up there. Did they see us leave?" "Don't think so, but they're still close." They kept moving. By late afternoon, clouds thickened again, and daylight thinned fast. Rafe steered them toward a place he remembered from years back, a half-collapsed hunting shelter dug into the north face of a rock wall. It wasn't much, 3 timber posts, a half roof, and a braced wall of brush. But it blocked the wind, and with firewood it would work. When they reached it, Suna stepped inside first. Dry, cold, but dry. She set down her small bundle, blanket, biscuit wrapped in cloth, revolver, then looked at him. "This'll hold for tonight." He nodded. "We'll stay till sunrise, then cut toward the creek trail. That'll take us west, away from the cabin." She knelt and began clearing a space for a fire. He didn't stop her. Instead, Rafe gathered what dry pine he could pull from beneath the branches, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd lived too long off whatever the land gave him. Suna struck the flint herself. 3 tries before a spark caught. The flame grew slow but steady, flickering weakly at first, then blooming into life. They worked in near silence, but every glance meant something now. When he shrugged off his coat and laid it beside her so she wouldn't freeze through the blanket, she accepted without a word. After they finished eating, just the last of the dried meat and a scrap of hard biscuit, she reached forward and added another log. The fire climbed higher, its glow painting warm light across the rock wall behind them. Out here, miles from anything human, it was the only light in the world. Rafe leaned against the stone, rifle resting by his leg. "You thinking they'll come after us?" she asked. "Hard to say." "If they do, will you stand and fight?" He met her stare. "Only if I've got no other choice." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I used to think taking a life ruined a person, but being hunted, that eats at you worse." He didn't argue. He didn't need to. She looked at him again. Not fearful, just worn thin. "I'm tired of running," she murmured. "You don't have to. Not with me." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was deciding something. Then, without asking, she closed the distance and sat beside him, close enough that her knee brushed his. He didn't shift away. Her hands were cold. She tucked them under the blanket and leaned just slightly against him. "You still won't touch me unless I ask," she whispered. "I won't." "Then, I'm asking." He turned toward her. Slow, careful, he slipped an arm around her shoulders, letting the weight settle gently over the blanket. She leaned into him, her body soft against his side, the firelight warming the edges of her face. No fevered grasp, no kiss. Just a quiet surrender between 2 souls who'd survived too much to rush anything. Outside, the ridge lay still under falling snow. The fire cracked softly. The cold stayed on the far side of the rock wall, and for the first night since leaving the cabin they slept, not just beside each other but truly together, because they wanted to. She woke before dawn. She hadn't moved much in her sleep. Her head still rested against Rafe's chest, rising and falling with his steady breath. His arm remained around her shoulders, protective, but never claiming her. When she shifted slightly, he opened his eyes but didn't speak. The fire had burned to a red core, its heat fading. The cold pressed back in around them, but neither reached for warmth immediately. They sat up quietly. Then she asked, soft as a sigh, "Do you still think we ought to keep moving?" He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "I don't want trouble finding that cabin, but we can't live our lives running either." She nodded slowly, staring at the embers. "I've been running since I was 16. I barely remember what it feels like to stay in one place long enough to see something grow." He studied her, the way the last firelight shaped her face. "We could try," he said. Her eyes lifted toward him. "You'd do that? Start someplace new?" "Not alone." The answer hung heavy between them. Not a burden, but a promise. They broke camp at first light, packed the blanket, scattered snow over the dead embers, wiped out every sign they'd sheltered there. Rafe scanned the lower trail with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years in uniform. No fresh movement, no disturbed snow, nothing broken. They followed the old creek path west, the route he once used for trapping before deep winter shut the land down. It wound through low timber and narrow stone cuts, hard to track, harder to follow. Perfect ground for beginning again. Suna walked beside him, not behind. Her feet still ached, and she favored one leg where frostbite had bruised her toes, but she never asked to stop. Around midday they paused in a clearing along the frozen creek. Rafe knelt, testing the ice to see if water ran beneath. Suna stood guard, eyes on the far slope. That's when they heard it. A voice. 2 men. Low. English, not Apache. She crouched instantly. Rafe slipped behind a pine, motioning for her to stay down. His rifle came up, but he didn't shoulder it. He just listened. The voices drifted off, fading south, away from their direction. Suna looked at him. "Bounty hunters?" "Could be," he murmured. "But they're not tracking. Didn't stop. Didn't read sign." She waited. "We keep moving," he said. They didn't speak again until they reached the bluff. Below stretched a long sweep of unclaimed ground, dry brush, stubborn earth, and a cedar grove halfway down the slope. Rafe stood still at the overlook. This could work. Suna stepped beside him, scanning the land. "There's water close?" 3 miles west. He nodded toward the horizon. "And nobody out here to claim it." "Spring-fed," Rafe said quietly. "Soil's stubborn, but it'll give if we work it. More than enough room for a cabin." Suna exhaled slowly. Not relief, something closer to steady resolve. "Then let's build something," she said. He looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded once. "You said not alone." "I meant that." She stepped in close, lifting her hand to his cheek. Her fingers were warm despite the wind cutting along the ridge. He leaned forward, letting his forehead touch hers. Then she kissed him, unhurried, not asking for anything, just a quiet promise that she was still there. When they parted, her smile was small but real, her first true one. Rafe reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of leather, the pouch he kept flint and odds in. From it, he took a small wood-handled knife. He turned toward a cedar trunk and carved a line into the bark. Then another. Then 4 more. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Marking the first day," he said. "If we're staying, we ought to start counting." Suna stepped beside him and added her own mark beneath his. Crooked, smaller, but there. Day 1. 2 people. No pursuers. Just snow, earth, sky in every direction, and room to start over. The land hadn't warmed, but it had grown familiar in the weeks since they carved that tree. The sky shifted. The creek thawed. The hardpan ground softened enough for post holes and shovels. The soil wasn't kind, but neither were they. Not anymore. The cabin rose one wall at a time. Rafe cut each beam, set each post. Suna hauled rock from the ridge to ring the foundation. No blueprints, no fancy tools, just what he remembered from before, and what she suggested from watching her father build with rope and mud when she was a girl. They didn't talk about running, or the cabin he'd left behind, or the horrors she'd escaped. Only what mattered now: timber, water, food, and each other. Inside the half-built cabin, the old stove from Rafe's place stood in the center. They'd hauled it across the valley on a sledge, Suna guiding Bristle while Rafe pushed behind. It took a full day and 2 scraped knuckles, but it burned hot again now, anchoring their new home. Suna made curtains from her old deerskin dress. She didn't explain why, only said it shouldn't be worn anymore, but didn't deserve to be buried either. She tied them across the window Rafe carved into the north wall, 2 cups on the shelf now, 2 spoons, 2 blankets folded on the cot they shared. Not from need, but choice. One morning Rafe came in from checking the trap line and found Suna crouched by the stove, brushing out her hair in the firelight. Her braid was longer now, thicker. Her skin healed, no cracked fingers, no bruises along her thighs. She looked up with a small smile. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to his hand. He glanced down, a fresh nick from the snare wire. "It's nothing." She stood and came to him, took his hand without asking. Sat him on the stool, dipped a rag in warm water, and cleaned the cut with slow, careful strokes. He watched her face, the calm set of her jaw, the faint scar along her cheek, the way her eyes softened when she concentrated. When she finished, she didn't let go. "You think they'll ever come back?" she asked quietly. "Maybe. You worried?" He looked at her. Her tone carried no fear, just wanting truth. "No." She leaned in and kissed him again, slower, deeper. Not survival. Not gratitude. A kiss that said, "We stayed." That night they sat on the front step, the unfinished cabin behind them, a blanket around their shoulders, her bare feet tucked against his leg. The stars were sharp, the moon low, the land quiet but alive with the whisper of cedar trees and the creak of the new roof settling in. Suna lifted her chin to the sky. "My mother used to say every star was a story, not just light, something lived." Rafe watched her in the dim glow. "You ever tell one?" he asked. "I'm living mine now," she murmured. He reached over, took her hand. She didn't pull away. When they finally stepped back inside and shut the door against the cold, there was no doubt left. Not about the land, not about the cabin, not about them. They hadn't built a new life quickly. They'd built it right. One log, one fire, one choice at a time. And they stayed. Together. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.